Hi, I'm Tom Lord, and this is the second segment of a video presentation called A WebOS for Collaboration and Its Ecosystem. When we left off, we were talking about the relation between the three key terms in our title. We noticed how collaboration on the web, acts of co-creation, communication, and so on, is what creates technology, such as what we're calling a WebOS, or Web Operating System. And in turn, that WebOS is itself technology for collaboration, and so it plays an important role in defining the possibilities and limits of the social and economic ecosystem within which collaboration occurs. And that's where we left off, so we can resume by closing that loop, adding the observation that the ecosystem, in turn, hosts collaboration. We have feedback. A technology establishes a society whose economies, in turn, create instances, acts of collaboration, and a subset of those collaborative acts maintains and extends the technology. So this is not only feedback, but positive feedback. And that's very exciting so long as one approves of the kind of human interaction and technology coming along, but what if you don't? What if the trend of the feedback loop is that it's self-amplifying, but the situation for the humans, the collaborators, is getting worse and worse? Well, the problem is there's no off switch. People collaborating freely on the net are going to keep going. It has momentum. It has a life of its own. And so we have to invoke the engineer's ultimate credo and call for caution, which probably sounds a bit dramatic. But we can look at some historical examples that show what some of the stakes are. So let's quickly do that. Some of you may remember, if you're old enough, before there were blogs or Google Groups, and before there was even a formally recognized World Wide Web, there was a particular piece of technology called NNTP. NNTP, if you've never heard of it, was a protocol, and programs implementing that protocol to create a system of groups, news groups. Google Groups grows out of that technology. NNTP was structured as a peer-to-peer network for running discussion groups. It was written to take over and help regulate a set of news groups called Usenet. Usenet was a kind of social and economic structure. It was a set of arrangements between various servers at many different organizations. The software, NNTP, had facilities that defined administrative roles and regular user roles. It created a system of governance about what news groups would be created and by whom and what posts would be removed or not, that kind of thing. This set of arrangements, Usenet, is thus what we're calling a set of economies. And of course, people actually came to use this system in fairly large numbers for the day. Usenet hosted real human interaction on the web. The net, and was even almost unmanageable to a degree. What was the nature of the interactions and of the administrative aspects of Usenet? This gets into the human collaboration. It was decentralized and open. There wasn't always unanimity, for example, about whether or not a given news group had a right to exist, and amazingly, the Usenet economies tolerated this. Some Usenet providers would allow a certain news group and others would ban it. There was no central official decision. There was no central authority. From a user perspective, you could seek out Usenet providers whose decisions you liked and avoid the ones you didn't like. If you really wanted to, you could afford the servers. You could even arrange to host your own little corner of Usenet, where you and your closest friends set the rules. So this arrangement decentralized authority and opened up opportunities to participate. Well, did it work? And if it worked, was it a good thing because of the freedom, or a bad thing because, in fact, it wound up being used for things like spreading child porn and other horrors? Really. Whether it was good or bad, ultimately it failed, more or less. Of course, people still very much use NNTP and Usenet, but things have changed. There's no off switch for that feedback loop, but it can spontaneously begin to wane, and that's what's happened here. NNTP and Usenet aren't growing like they once were, aren't keeping up, aren't as important as they seemed like they might have been. Well, why? I think part of the answer lies in the second example. So let's go back to our abstract schema, talk about a different technology. After NNTP was invented, the World Wide Web came along, and we got a bunch of technologies, some of which I'll sum up and just give the label Google. Let's call them Google. Can't sum up everything that there is to Google technology in a few words, but I think most people are familiar with this, so it's a good reference point. That set of technologies, per our schema, regulates and creates an ecosystem of some sort, a set of economies. Again, Google is complex and diverse. We can focus on the most obvious elements of those economies: search and ads. If we're looking at those kind of economies, the next question is, what kind of collaboration do those particular economies create? And again, there's too much to sum up in a few seconds, so we're going to focus on one aspect. And I don't mean to pick on Google, I really don't. I mean to be a little bit dramatic. So we'll focus on some negative aspects. We'll focus on some of the asymmetries that search and ads, as implemented by the specific technology of Google. We'll look at some of the asymmetries they create and some aspects of them that users might not like if they understood them better. And these are familiar elements if you read the blogosphere. We're talking about things like surveillance. And what do I mean by surveillance? Well, for example, Google recently announced they'll do behavioral tracking. They'll try to make measurements of how people traverse around the web to third-party sites, and from that derive demographic data, that sort of thing, helpful to their ad business. Surveillance data could be used for lots of things. They're going to use it to sell ads. Another aspect of this is targeting, and this is, of course, the primary application of that surveillance data, which is not only is this company going to keep track of how people behave, but now advertisers will be directed to people they seem most likely to be able to influence. So users will be constantly subjected to very targeted, individually targeted attempts to influence their behavior, where these attempts are informed by private surveillance of the users. Sounds horrifying, doesn't it? When you put it that way. And of course, another aspect of this, another negative sort of kind of human interaction, collaboration, asymmetric behavior that comes out of this is the whole notion of link spamming. Google search is, of course, based largely on the PageRank algorithm, and people attempt to manipulate the outcomes of this algorithm, frequently for commercial gain, sometimes for political purposes, and sometimes just for fun. And so we get this information obfuscating behavior of link spam on the net. Well, I made all that sound awfully negative on purpose, but really there's a question: is it good or bad? Or, given that this is Google, should we say, is it evil or not evil? It doesn't matter. What's significant is it's big, and again, there's no off switch. So in later sections of this talk, we're going to begin to spec out the technology for a web operating system for collaboration. There's actually specific pieces of software I'd like to encourage people to help me build and assemble. It's something we have to actually do collaboratively if it's to work. One of the points of the preliminary matters here is to invoke the engineer's credo and say, when we create this technology, we're going to have some control over the economies, over the ecosystem that that technology implies. And as the feedback loop completes, there can be better and worse outcomes. We should be mindful and we should be careful. And of course, the other point of this introduction was to introduce some of our basic terminology and to help orient the rest of the discussion. Thanks for sticking around, and I hope you enjoyed part one, where we get into the real nitty-gritty, or begin to. Thanks.